All right, let's move on. You can finish that some other time and hopefully continue to give thought to it. I decided many years ago there was two ways to live life. And I decided this in my basketball career. I decided it in my business. I decided it in pretty well each aspect of my life. There's a fast track to growth and a slow track to growth. And one of the things I realized was I had a lot of big goals, a lot of high aspirations, and a lot of big dreams. And I realized I was going to need to find a way to put myself on the fast track to achieve the dreams that I had. I still remember I stepped in, it was my first year at the University of Waterloo, and it was the athletic banquet. And I don't know how the athletic banquets work now, but it used to be over at Fed Hall, just the other side of campus. And we stepped into that athletic banquet, and dinner, presentations, awards, and then they announced the Athlete of the Year. And I still remember, lots of different awards. MVP of the team, for me, that was a big one. Oh, who's going to be the MVP? Wow, maybe one day I could aspire to be the MVP of our team. And then it happened. Judy McRae, the athletic director, stood up and said, now I would like to announce the male and female athletes of the year. And I'll never forget this. They announced the male athlete of the year, and everyone stood up. Standing ovation, everyone stood up. And I watched this athlete from another sport walk to the front. And immediately, it was almost instantaneous. I thought, I want to experience that. And probably many athletes do, but I thought, I want to experience that. And right then there, in that moment, I thought, I've got to change a lot. I've got to grow a lot. I've got to get a lot better. I wasn't even the rookie of the year on our team. I was fortunate even to be on the team. And somehow I was going to have to go from that to being a starter to being probably all conference. And then they read off the list of awards and credentials of that athlete of the year. And I realized I'm going to have to accomplish a whole lot in the next few years to make that happen. And I realized pretty quickly I was going to need to be very intentional about my growth. I was going to need to be on the fast track. And 5 years later, my name was called out, and everyone rose to their feet, and I accomplished that dream. And from that time on, I started to realize that maybe any of my dreams were possible. Maybe they were possible. And I started to develop this mentality, why not me? Why not me? Or why couldn't I achieve that? Why couldn't I experience that? And I've applied that in my business. I've applied that in each aspect of my life. But the answer to why not me each time was, it can be me, but I've got to learn and grow, and I've got to learn and grow quickly. So let me continue on in terms of being intentional, in terms of my growth. The people you spend time with, the experiences that you have, the books that you read. So the experiences that I had, I realized I was going to need to, in order to grow into everything, all the dreams that I have in my life, and I hope you have dreams as well. And if you don't have dreams, get behind somebody else's dream. Find somebody else's dream to get behind that. You say, I can get behind that. I'd love to be a part of that. And we at PGC, we get a whole lot of people behind the dream that we have of being a light in the basketball world and helping to shape the basketball world. That's our dream, to help to change the way the game of basketball is played and taught. But to accomplish that, I've realized I've got to grow a lot. I've got to learn a lot. And to do that, I need to have a lot of experiences. And so I'm very intentional to go to conferences, to go hear speakers. And part of that for me as a person of faith is going to church and learning and growing and changing. And I'm diligent to listen to speakers if I'm driving. Anything I can do to grow and learn and change. In fact, my kids are smiling right now because they say, Dad, are we really going to listen to John Maxwell again? And I don't make them listen to John Maxwell all the time. They might feel like it. They win some of the time. But if you want to grow, you need to be intentional about the experiences that you have and the books that you read. And the books that you read, I love what John Wooden, some of you may be familiar with Coach John Wooden. He won 10 national championships at UCLA. A number of years ago, my business partner, who was very, very good friends, a dear friend of Coach Wooden before he passed away, she asked me if I wanted to go down to Los Angeles and have breakfast with Coach Wooden and spend a day with him. And so I flew down and had the opportunity to have breakfast with the most famous, most successful coach of all time in his early 90s at the time, and had the chance to talk to him about life and his career and ask questions of him. And he gave me this card, and he created this timeless wisdom from a godly father, and basically it was what his dad taught him about life. And on the back he had a 7-point creed. One of the things he said in his 7-point creed is drink deeply from good books. I love that. Drink deeply from good books. And one of the things that I've become very intentional with for the past 15 years is drinking deeply from good books. I'll just mention at the end, I was inspired by Coach Wooden, and after he passed away, I think I'd like to create a card to give out to athletes or young people. And so I created my own card. Coach Wooden signed my card, but I didn't. Mine's not for me to sign. I didn't put my picture on it the way Coach Wooden did, because I'm no Coach Wooden. But there are some thoughts on doing life well here. So if you'd like one, I've got a little box right behind the screen. You're welcome to help yourself to one at the end. So, intentional growth. Second, I've been intentional to develop what my cousin, who's an autism specialist, calls attitudinal fitness. Been intentional to develop my attitudinal fitness. My question to you is, how is your attitudinal fitness? There's only 2 ways that you can know how your attitudinal fitness is. And that's through difficult people and difficult circumstances. That's when your attitudinal fitness is revealed. And it's one thing to be physically fit and in good shape. It's a whole nother to be attitudinally fit and in good shape. And one of the things I realized is I've had the opportunity to spend some time with some pretty incredible people and pretty special people. And one of the things that I noticed and that I've taken note of is that they have tremendous consistency, regardless of the people and regardless of the circumstance. And I decided I wanted to be like them. I wanted to develop my attitudinal fitness. And so here's 3 ways that I develop my attitudinal fitness consistently. 1 is express gratefulness daily. And as a person of faith, that's through prayer. Number 2, celebrate and appreciate others daily. Finding ways to appreciate others, whether it's appreciating my wife, Kate, appreciating our kids, or celebrating our staff members. We have something called celebrations in our company. Every time we jump on a conference call, every single day, we open our calls with celebrations. And we share what we appreciated about our day or someone else or somebody's contribution that they've made. And it's made our company a pretty special place to work in for all those that are involved. But it's part of this commitment for us to develop our attitudinal fitness. And 3rd, to write thank you notes regularly. In fact, if you want to do a great exercise, a year ago I did a 30-day challenge to write a thank you note every single day. And it's one thing to send a text, hey, thanks. It's another thing to send a quick email or a Facebook post. But to actually write a handwritten note and put it with a stamp on it, that's that thing you put in the top right corner of an envelope, and to put it in the mail and send to somebody. Gosh, how many of you love to receive mail? How many of you don't like to receive email? I get so many emails, but boy, when I get a piece of mail from someone, so to develop my attitudinal fitness and to be a person of appreciation, I've attempted to make a habit of sharing appreciation by writing notes. And in terms of your approach to circumstances, at our PGC summer sessions, we teach a lot about that. Let me just say, read to you a quote by Coach K, Coach Krzyzewski, who knows a thing or two about handling difficult circumstances. Look at your problems as problems, and they'll continue to hold you down. See them as blessings in disguise, and that's what they'll truly become. Great quote from Coach K. A third decision that I made, a choice in my life that I think has served me well, is the choice to live with uncommon generosity. Uncommon generosity. It's gratifying to make money. There's a level of satisfaction that comes from knowing you have what you need and for many of us to have more than we need, because what we need is really food and shelter. And most of us can afford to buy iPods and iPhones and computers and things even beyond the necessities. But far more gratifying than making money is the fulfillment that comes from giving it away. And I share this with you because so many of you are young people, and if you can make this decision now while you're young, it's much easier to live out as you get older. And let me tell you what it looked like for me. Being a person of faith, I grew up with an understanding that we give to our church. And for my parents, that was a concept that they lived by, which was to give 10% away. And then on top of that, to give at least another 5% to the community. And so that was something that I grew up hearing about. And when I started my camp when I was 15 years old, I still remember 9 kids came to that first camp, that first year when I was 15. I was 3 years older than most of them. They were 11 and 12 years old. And I made $255. That was the best $255 I ever made. And my dad said to me, "Son, have you put aside $25 to give away, to give to the church or to give to the community?" And I said, I will. And I did. And my dad was an inspiration for me. And then my uncle, who's a very successful businessman, became an inspiration when, one, he gave me a book to read. He said, "Mano, you've got to read this book. And in fact, read it 5 times before you turn 20. And he gave me this book, The Templeton Plan, 21 Steps to Success and Happiness. And I read the Templeton Plan, and one of the chapters, it was 21 chapters about how to do life remarkably well. And one of the chapters was on giving. And I learned some principles on giving that I've never forgotten. And then my uncle gave me this challenge. He said, "Why not see if you can start out giving 10%, but by the time you're done your life, you're not keeping 90 and giving 10, but you're giving 90 and keeping 10." And that was a challenge. And I realized to achieve that, and that has become a goal for me, to bring that to life, I was going to need to give a higher percentage every single year. And so my challenge to you, especially to those of you young people in this room, because it's a lot easier to start with $255 than it is to start with $25,000 and think about giving a percentage away. But even if it's $25,000, start small. Start at 1%, start at 5%, and just decide you're going to add 1% each year. But for those of you who have made very little, it's not hard to start at $25.50 to give away. The benefit that I've experienced and that our family has experienced is, one, there's a blessing in the giving. There's a blessing in the giving. I think I've received far more in giving than anything I've bought and kept for myself. But in addition to that, I think there's a principle, there's a law of sowing and reaping. What you plant, you harvest. When you give, it comes back to you in full measure and often more. And it's not necessarily financially. Sometimes it comes back in different ways. But I've been committed to a life of uncommon generosity, and my challenge to you would be to do the same. The last piece that it does before I move on is it breaks the trap of more. We live in a society of more. We're continually being advertised to more, get this, get that. And when you choose to give, it breaks that cycle. It breaks that habit. It breaks that trap. Let me move on from choices that I made in my life and decisions that I made to habits. But first, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Has there already been a whoa or a within 1 week? And if there is, you might just want to jot it down or just make mental note of it. So take 10 seconds now. All right, moving on. The choices I've made in my life, the habits that I've developed. I'm continuing to develop habits. Let me tell you, I haven't arrived. With everything that I share, both in terms of choices and habits, gosh, if you knew me as well as my family knows me, you'd know I haven't arrived, not even close. I've got so far to go, and I have developed some habits, though, that have put me in a position to be able to fulfill some of the dreams that I've had and to be able to experience success in different aspects of life. And I want to take a few minutes to share with you. I was thinking about which habits do I pull out to share with you. And what I've decided to do instead is share with you what I've come to develop. I didn't even know this until the most recent book that I've recommended. I didn't have a name for it, but now I have a name for it. It's called The Rule of Life. The Rule of Life. And what I've realized is over the past 20 years, I've developed a rule of life. And rule comes from the Greek word that means trellis, that a vine grows up. And the rule of life is simply this. It's a framework or structure by which you live your life that positions you to blossom and bear fruit. And I had never really thought about the framework that I've developed for life. But after I read this book, I realized, wow, over the past 20 years, I really have developed a trellis, a framework that's allowed me to grow and in different respects allowed me to blossom. And I'd like to just walk you through my rule of life. And probably for some of you, you've developed a rule of life as well. For some of you young people, you may not have as of yet, but you may want to start to think about what's your rule of life. What is the framework or structure that will allow you to do life well? And one of the things, of course, if you don't have a vine, if a vine doesn't have a trellis or a tree to grow up, what happens? The fruit ends up being on the ground, and the fruit rots. And what does rotten fruit look like for us in our lives? I think it looks like this: stress, worry, anxiety. I think those are some of the signs that maybe our vine is not growing up the trellis and that our lives are producing some fruit that is rotting instead of bearing fruit the way it should. So let me tell you what my rule of life for health and well-being, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, let me share with you what my rule of life has been. And once again, I didn't know this was my rule of life. I didn't know this was my trellis, the framework or structure by which I was building my life on. I just added these things over time. And you'll add them over time as well. It'll be a work in progress. It'll be a journey for you. And some of you may already have a really well-established rule of life, but maybe there's something that you may want to add to it. I'm going to share with you just 5 of the pieces of my rule of life. I have 10 altogether. I'll tell you 5 right now, and then I'll move on. Number 1, 8 hours of sleep a night. 8 hours of sleep a night. When I was coaching here at the University of Waterloo for 3 years as the women's basketball coach, and it started well before that, it continued well after that, I was an early morning guy. I was on the fast track for growth. I would go to the gym at 6 a.m. to train. That continued after I was done my career. I would get up at 5 in the morning and start my day, regardless of what time I went to sleep. If I went to sleep at midnight, I was still getting up to train or getting up to work. And I went and saw 3 different specialists because I was feeling really run down. 3 different specialists all took a look at me and said, we don't think there's anything wrong with you. We think you just need to sleep more. And so, they started asking, how much do you sleep? And then when they realized how little I was sleeping, they said, you need to sleep more. If you plan to live a long and healthy life, you need to sleep more. And so I decided to make a concerted effort, make it a part of my rule of life. Once again, I didn't know it was my rule of life then, but to sleep 8 hours. I don't know how much you need, but one of the things I've discovered is sleep really does refresh. And I realized as I was reading my kids' stories as they'd go to sleep at night, and I'd fall asleep before they did, I'd be mid-sentence and falling asleep, I realized I had a problem, and I needed help, and that help was more sleep. So that's been a key part of my rule of life. Your rule of life may be completely different than mine. Number 2, to play and sweat daily. To play and sweat daily. And do you know what? I've had to relearn how to play. Because sweating daily was no problem. You play as a kid, and then a lot of times we become competitive athletes, and our play turns into competition. It goes from recreation to competition. Nothing wrong with that. But we forget how to play. And then I became a parent, and I had young kids, and I started playing with them, and I rediscovered how to play. And play is something done for its own sake. It's done for its own sake, not for an outcome or a result or even necessarily to win. And so I've decided to be very intentional to daily play in some form or fashion. And I've had to be creative. We went and got a slack line. I don't know if you've ever seen a slack line, but a slack line you can attach between two poles or two trees, and you balance on it. It's almost like a tightrope. So I go out. I haven't been doing it through the winter. I did it last winter. This winter, not so much. But I go out on the slack line for 10 minutes, and I bounce, and I jump, and I try and jump in the air and turn on it and land, and I just play, and I just have fun. And the kids come home, and of course, when you have young kids, it's easy to play. We play soccer, and we wrestle, and we play sports in our basement, and we've made play a daily part of our routine. But I've realized that I need to be intentional with play, and I need to be intentional with sweating daily, because I know that's an instrumental part of good health for me. Play and sweat daily. Number 3, a Sabbath day's rest. A Sabbath day's rest. Whether you come from any faith perspective or not, gotta appreciate a God who commands his people to take one day off every week. I mean, at that point in time, that was unfathomable. I mean, people basically ate what they what they caught or what they farmed that day. I mean, it was subsistence living. And so the thought of not working for a day, well, how are we going to eat? How are we going to live? But God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that we would burn out, knew that we need rest, that we need change, and that we need to pace ourselves to make it through this life and make it through it well. And I decided, it's taken many years to fully implement this, and now we have as a family. But every Sunday, and it doesn't have to be a Sunday for you, but my recommendation would be to have a day off, a day that's different. And for what it looks like for our family, my rule of life is we spend a day with family, faith, and friends. I disconnect from the computer, I don't engage in work, and there's so much work to be done that it's very difficult to disengage. It's taken being very intentional. But just like God's people, the Israelites, a couple thousand years ago, when he instituted in the 10 Commandments. Remember, this was one of the 10 Commandments. Do not murder, do not steal. Take a day off? It's amazing to think that that was included in all the things that we need to do to be able to live as a society, but that was included in one. And I think one of the reasons it was included was because it immediately meant they had to live a life of faith. Because how are they going to eat? What if they weren't collecting their food every day? And how are they going to survive? And they had to take a step of faith. And so for me, it's been a step of faith. I have so much work to do and so much going on, but I'm going to disengage. And that's been a tremendous benefit to me, refreshing, revitalizing, refueling, and my family. And so that's been another piece of my rule of life. The fourth is to take 2 to 3 weeks holidays every year. And for any of you, if you know what it's like to train at a high level and train daily, I realized I needed to do that with my body as well. But I approached life and my work career the way I approached my sport, and I went all in. But I realized I needed to be intentional with taking time off and disengaging with work. And so that's part of my rule of life. And then the fifth, simply to pray and read the scriptures daily. And for me, praying daily helps me find perspective. It helps me focus on other things beyond me as I pray for others. And then secondly, reading scriptures, the wisdom of the ages. I turn to the wisdom of the ages to gain insights for my life. I'm going to give you 15 to 30 seconds quickly to just identify, have you had some form of a rule of life in your life? If so, what has it been? Or is there something that you just heard that's given you a whoa, I want to implement that, or something else in your rule of life? I'll give you a few moments now. Go ahead.